Christmas, 1985. There was a particular kind of magic in the air that year, a fever that had little to do with the season's usual goodwill. It was a potent commercial alchemy smelling of cinnamon-dusted pretzels from a kiosk, a sharp hint of chlorine from the gurgling decorative fountain, and the faint, sweet, almost cloying scent of new plastic. This was the aroma of the Meadowlands Galleria in suburban New Jersey, a sprawling temple of commerce shimmering under the oppressive weight of tinsel, faux snow, and relentless Muzak versions of Jingle Bell Rock. And at the very heart of this national fever, this collective irrational obsession, was a doll. Not just any doll, but a Cabbage Patch Kid. They were the holy grail of the holiday season. Ordinary, decent people, loving mothers and fathers who taught their children to share and be kind, were transformed by a primal need for these round-faced, yarn-haired creations with their bizarre, officially printed birth certificates. The demand was a tidal wave of want, and the supply was a mere trickle, turning the pristine linoleum-tiled aisles of toy stores into modern-day battlegrounds. It was in this world of cheerful, frantic consumerism that the body was found. Not out in the open, where shoppers jostled for coveted parking spaces and last-minute gifts, but deep in the mall's quiet, utilitarian guts. Service Corridor B7 was a place of humming transformers, stained concrete floors, and towering stacks of empty, flattened cardboard boxes that smelled of dust and distant lands. It was a gray concrete artery that fed the gleaming stores, an unseen and unthought-of backstage to the grand theater of retail. This is where Gus Petrovich, a 62-year-old security guard with kind, tired eyes and heels worn down on his uniform shoes, had begun his final shift. He was found by a janitor named Earl, who was pushing a trash bin with one squeaky wheel that echoed mournfully down the long passage. Gus was slumped against the cold steel of a stockroom door, his heavy security flashlight lying a few feet away, its beam growing weak against the grimy floor, a pale, dying circle of light. Lieutenant Frank Rizzo arrived just as the first forensics van was pulling up, its flashing red and blue lights looking garish and profane against the festive, oversized candy canes bolted to the mall's back entrance. Rizzo was a man who seemed to be permanently braced against a cold wind, even indoors. He'd been a detective in this county for 25 years, and the holiday season never brought him much cheer. It only seemed to add a layer of desperate, glittering hypocrisy to the usual catalog of human failings. "What have we got, fellas?" he asked, his voice a low gravel that cut through the chilly December air, his breath pluming in front of him. A young uniformed officer, Tommy Rourke, barely out of the academy and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, seemed relieved to see him. "Looks like a robbery gone bad, Lieutenant. It's Gus, one of the mall guards. A fixture here." The janitor found him. "Wallet's gone, looks like. We figure he might have interrupted someone trying to break into the Toy World stockroom back here." Rizzo nodded slowly, his eyes already scanning the scene, absorbing the details the younger officer's untrained gaze had likely missed. He saw the victim's posture, not the crumpled heap of a sudden heart attack, but a peculiar stillness. He saw the scuff marks on the floor, not the chaotic arcs of a struggle, but two straight parallel lines, as if something or someone had been dragged a short distance. He walked over to the body, crouching down with a weary sigh that spoke of tired knees and far too many crime scenes that began exactly like this. The coroner, a perpetually exhausted man named Dr. Evans, was already making his preliminary notes. "No obvious signs of major trauma, Frank?" "Not yet. Could be a massive coronary, stress-induced. He's the right age. But we'll know for sure back at the lab." Rizzo grunted, a sound of non-committal acknowledgement. He looked at Gus's face. It was peaceful, strangely so, the lines of worry smoothed out in death. Then his gaze fell upon Gus's left wrist. Tucked just under the crisp cuff of his blue uniform shirt was his watch, a simple gold-plated Timex with a worn leather band. It wasn't expensive, but it was gold-colored, shiny. A desperate thief, a mugger who would kill a man for the $20 or $30 in his wallet, would surely have snatched the watch. It was a small thing, a tiny discordant detail in a symphony of holiday noise and official procedure. But for Frank Rizzo, it was a note that was terribly, jarringly out of tune. In the era before computerized databases and the cold efficiency of instant background checks, a proper investigation moved at the speed of a detective's Ford Crown Victoria and the depths of his patience. To understand the victim, a man reduced to a case number and a set of preliminary findings, you had to understand his life. That meant a visit to the place where he was no longer uniform number 7, but Gus Petrovich, husband, grandfather, neighbor. His home was a small, immaculately kept clapboard house on a quiet street where the Christmas decorations were modest and heartfelt. Plastic light-up snowmen stood sentinel on frosty lawns, and single electric candles glowed with a warm, steady light in every window. Lieutenant Rizzo felt the familiar, bitter pang of professional intrusion as he knocked on the door, the festive wreath with its perfectly tied red velvet bow seeming to mock the grim purpose of his visit. The door was opened by Maria Petrovich, a woman whose face was puffy and blotched from a night of unimaginable tears, but whose bearing still held the quiet, unyielding dignity of a long life lived with purpose. She led Rizzo and his partner into a living room that was a veritable museum of a happy, simple life. On the dark wood of the mantelpiece, a gallery of framed photos chronicled Gus and Maria's journey through the decades. A classic black-and-white wedding photo from the 50s, him skinny in a rented tux, her radiant, a faded color snapshot of them, on a Jersey Shore pier in the 70s, proudly holding a gigantic bluefish, a more recent glossy photo of them surrounded by a gaggle of laughing grandchildren. The room smelled of lemon polish, old books, and the ghost of recently brewed coffee. "He was a good man, Lieutenant," Maria said, her voice thick but steady, a testament to her fortitude. "He never hurt a soul in his life. Worked 40 years at the factory, bottling. When they closed down, he couldn't just sit. He said sitting still was the fastest way to get old. So he took the security job." Rizzo let her talk, his questions gentle, spaced out between sips of the coffee she insisted on making for them. He asked about Gus's routine, his friends, any arguments or troubles he might have had. Maria shook her head slowly, tracing the floral pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. Troubles? Number Gus was steady, like a rock, predictable, everything on time. She paused, wringing a crumpled tissue in her hands. The only thing on his mind was Florida. That was our dream. He had this brochure. He kept it in the nightstand, a little condo in Sarasota. He'd just calculated it all out again last week, with his pension and what we'd saved. He said in 2 more years, we could do it. No more snow to shovel, he'd say with this big grin. Just sunshine and fishing. Then her expression shifted. A flicker of memory of something that didn't quite fit into the neat portrait of her steady husband. There was one thing. It's probably nothing silly. Rizzo leaned forward slightly, his posture betraying a flicker of interest. Mrs. Petrovich, anything, even if it seems silly, could be important. He was excited the last few weeks, she explained, a crease of confusion on her brow. Secretive, which wasn't like my Gus at all. He said he had a side hustle going at the mall. His exact words. He chuckled when he said it, like a boy with a secret, said it was going to get us to Florida a whole year early. I asked him what it was, worried he was getting into something, but he just smiled and tapped the side of his nose. It's all about the delivery manifests, Maria, he told me one night. It's all right there in the paperwork, a little gold mine hiding in plain sight. He was checking the manifests for the big holiday shipments, making sure the stores got what they were supposed to. He made it sound like he'd found a winning lottery ticket in those boring papers. Rizzo's mind flashed back to the crime scene. A missing wallet, but a gold-plated watch left behind. A man dreaming of a Florida retirement, suddenly talking about a secret gold mine found in shipping manifests. The official theory was a simple, tragic robbery. But sitting in this warm, grief-stricken living room, Frank Rizzo knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this case wasn't simple at all. It was about something Gus had discovered, something valuable hidden in the endless, mundane paperwork that documented the river of Christmas cheer flowing into the Meadowlands Galleria. To truly comprehend the forces that led to Gus Petrovich's death in a cold service corridor, one had to first understand the collective, nationwide madness of Christmas 1985. It wasn't just a toy. A Cabbage Patch Kid was a status symbol, a tangible proof of parental love, a hard-won trophy acquired through cunning, endurance, and sometimes sheer brute force. These dolls weren't manufactured on an assembly line. They were born in a cabbage patch and adopted. Each one came with a unique, often comical name, like Otis Lee or Edna May, and a formal birth certificate that you could mail in to receive a birthday card from the company a year later. It was a brilliant, unprecedented marketing stroke that transformed a piece of molded plastic and fabric into a unique, irreplaceable member of the family. This carefully crafted story, this commercial mythos, created a frenzy that defied all logic. Nightly news channels ran breathless stories of parents lining up for hours in the freezing pre-dawn cold, of fistfights breaking out in the aisles of Toys R Us, of normally placid suburban mothers turning into snarling beasts over the last doll on the shelf. A doll that retailed for a modest $30 could easily be sold out of the back of a car for 10, even 15 times that amount. In this superheated environment, the line between a desperate parent and a common criminal became perilously, frighteningly thin. Lieutenant Rizzo found himself back at the mall the next day, but this time he was looking at it through a new, cynical lens. The cheerful, bustling crowds now seemed like a teeming mass of potential suspects and victims, the incessant holiday music a grating soundtrack to a brewing mystery. His destination was Toy World, the largest toy store in the Galleria and the undisputed epicenter of the local Cabbage Patch craze. The store was a jarring assault on the senses, a cacophony of beeping electronic games, the synthesized voices of talking teddy bears, the wails of overstimulated children, and the strained voices of their stressed-out parents. A large handwritten sign, taped aggressively to the glass entrance, read, "Absolutely no Cabbage Patch Kids. We don't know when we are getting more. Please don't ask our staff." Rizzo pushed his way through the human traffic jam to the manager's office, a small glass-walled cube at the back of the store. The manager was a young man in his late 20s named Kevin Doyle. He had the kind of slicked-back hair and overly confident air of someone who believed he was destined for greater things, even if he was currently wearing a bright red smock with a cartoon teddy bear embroidered on the pocket. He looked harried, but maintained a veneer of cool composure. "Lieutenant," he said, shaking Rizzo's hand with a grip that was a little too firm, a little too practiced. "This whole thing is a tragedy, a real shock. Gus was a great guy. Always had a nice word for everyone. Can't believe it." Rizzo settled into the cramped office chair, the shelves around him overflowing with board games and action figures. "Mr. Doyle, Gus's job was to check the incoming shipment manifests against the actual cargo. He was diligent about it. Did he ever report any problems to you? Any discrepancies, missing items, anything at all?" Kevin leaned back in his squeaky chair, steepling his fingers in a gesture he probably thought made him look like a CEO. "Discrepancies?" "Lieutenant, with all due respect, this entire season is one big chaotic discrepancy. We're supposed to get 100 dolls from corporate, we get 20. We're promised a shipment on a Tuesday. It shows up on a Friday with half the items back-ordered. The paperwork from corporate, the manifests from the trucking companies, it's what I call organized chaos. Gus did his job. He'd bring me the papers, I'd sign off on them. He never once mentioned anything being stolen or missing, if that's what you're asking." Behind Kevin, through the small, smudged window in his office door, Rizzo could see a young stock boy, barely out of his teens, nervously arranging boxes of board games. He was pale and gangly, and he kept glancing toward the office, trying not to be seen. "Who else handles the morning shipments with you?" Rizzo asked, his eyes still fixed on the boy. "That's Ricky," Kevin said, glancing over his shoulder dismissively. "Ricky Schultz. Good kid, works hard, a little slow on the uptake sometimes, but he can lift. It's just me and him in the mornings when the trucks come. We unload, Gus checks the manifest, and we get the stuff onto the floor. It's a simple, foolproof system." But Rizzo knew, from long and bitter experience, that the simplest systems were often the easiest to corrupt. He was standing in a room that was the gateway to a craze worth a fortune, and the only thing standing between the limited supply and the ravenous demand were 2 store employees and a 62-year-old security guard who had been excitedly talking about a gold mine. In the days before every piece of data was digitized and cross-referenced by an algorithm, real police work was a physical, tactile thing. It was about paper. Boxes and boxes of it, each sheet a potential clue. Lieutenant Rizzo's desk, already a monument to organized clutter, was now completely buried under a mountain of documents retrieved from the Meadowlands Galleria's administrative office. Security logs, employee time cards, maintenance reports, and, most importantly, the delivery manifests Gus Petrovich had spoken of with such secretive glee. To the casual observer, they were just monotonous lists of items, a bureaucratic testament to the ceaseless river of commerce that flowed through them all. To Rizzo, they were a potential map leading to a killer. He and his team, including the young, sharp Detective Miller, began the painstaking, eye-glazing process of cross-referencing every manifest Gus had signed in the last month with the corresponding inventory sign-in sheets from Toy World. "This is like trying to find one specific needle in a haystack made entirely of other identical needles," Detective Miller grumbled late one afternoon, rubbing his tired eyes as he flipped through yet another thick binder. The work was slow, tedious, and mind-numbing. They established a clear timeline. The big toy shipments arrived like clockwork on Tuesdays and Fridays, usually between 6 and 7 a.m., before the mall officially opened to the public. The truck would pull up to the cavernous loading bay B, and Gus would be there to meet it, a thermos of hot coffee in hand. He'd take the clipboard and manifest from the driver, and as Kevin and Ricky unloaded the boxes, Gus would stand by, checking off the items. According to every single piece of paper, the system worked like a well-oiled machine. The number of Cabbage Patch Kids listed on the shipping manifest always matched the number Kevin Doyle signed for in his official store inventory log. There were no discrepancies, no red flags, nothing. The paper trail was pristine. For 3 long days, the investigation felt like it was spinning its wheels in the dirty, slushy snow of the police station parking lot. The official coroner's report came back and only added to the confusion. The definitive cause of death was a massive coronary event, a heart attack. But the ME added a crucial detail. There were physiological signs of a recent intense spike in adrenaline. He was either terrified out of his mind or in a very heated argument right before he died, the ME Dr. Evans told Rizzo over the phone. And one more thing. There was a faint, deep bruise on his left shoulder. Post-mortem lividity makes it hard to see, but it's there, roughly circular. Not enough to kill him, not by a long shot. But someone pushed him, Frank. Hard! This confirmed Rizzo's gut feeling that Gus hadn't just collapsed. He had been in a confrontation. But about what? The flawless paperwork offered no answers. It was on the 4th day, when Rizzo was about to give up on the paper trail, that he found it. It wasn't in the official manifests or the store's inventory logs. It was in Gus's own personal security logbook, a small, cheap, spiral-bound notebook he kept in his locker. His widow, Maria, had brought it in, thinking it might help. Most of it was mundane, written in Gus's neat, slightly slanted cursive. 10:40 p.m., all clear, Sector G. 2:15 a.m., group of teenagers cleared from food court. But on the last 2 pages, Gus had started a different kind of list. There were dates, every Tuesday and Friday for the past 5 weeks. Next to each date was a number, and next to that, a single cryptic word. Box. The numbers were small. 3, 5, 4, 3. And on the final entry, dated the day before his death, he had written, Friday delivery, 5 box, demand. The word demand was underlined twice, so hard the pen had torn the thin paper. It wasn't an official log of store inventory. It was a private ledger. Rizzo stared at the page, the pieces clicking into place with an almost audible snap. This wasn't the meticulous record of a security guard. It was the careful accounting of a blackmailer. Gus hadn't found a simple discrepancy in the paperwork. He'd been documenting a crime that happened before the paperwork was ever signed. The little spiral notebook changed everything. It was the Rosetta Stone for the entire case. It refocused the investigation from a phantom thief in a shadowy service corridor to the 2 people who had exclusive access to those boxes before they were ever officially counted: Kevin Doyle, the ambitious manager, and Ricky Schultz, the quiet, impressionable stock boy. In Rizzo's mind, they were no longer just employees. They were a partnership, a 2-man conspiracy, and Gus Petrovich had somehow fatally stumbled into the middle of it. The next logical step was to dismantle that partnership, and to do that, Rizzo needed to understand the 2 young men who formed it. Who were they? What did they want? Greed was almost always the motive, but greed was never simple. It was always fueled by something more personal, by desperation or desire. The background check on Kevin Doyle painted a picture of pure, unadulterated ambition. He lived in a small apartment in a trendy new complex that was, by all calculations, just a little too expensive for a toy store manager's salary. He drove a used but flashy red Camaro, a car that screamed, "Look at me." His co-workers, when interviewed discreetly, described him as smooth, smart, and constantly talking about his next move, about getting into real estate or stock trading. He saw his current job at Toy World not as a career, but as a temporary, slightly embarrassing inconvenience on his inevitable path to wealth and success. He was the kind of person who saw rules not as boundaries, but as suggestions, irritating obstacles to be navigated or ignored. Rizzo pegged him instantly as the architect of the scheme, the one with the nerve, the arrogance, and the know-how to manipulate the system from the inside. He knew the manifests were just paper. The real value was in the unopened, undocumented boxes on the loading dock. Ricky Schultz was an entirely different story. The file on him was thin, almost non-existent. He was 19, still living with his parents in a modest house just a few towns over. His father had been laid off from the local Ford plant 6 months prior, and the family was struggling. Friends and neighbors described Ricky as a good kid, maybe a little too eager to please, a little starstruck by older, more confident figures. He looked up to Kevin, saw him as a mentor, a glimpse of the successful, charismatic person he desperately hoped to one day become. He was the brawn of the operation, the one who could quickly and quietly move the heavy boxes. But more importantly, Rizzo suspected, he was the conscience. He was the one who would get nervous, the one who would feel the crushing weight of their actions, the one who would start to panic when a kindly old security guard started paying a little too much attention and making notes in a little book. Rizzo could now picture the entire operation in his mind with perfect clarity. The delivery truck arrives in the pre-dawn quiet of the loading bay. Kevin, with his manager's clipboard and air of authority, distracts the truck driver with small talk and questions about the shipping order. Meanwhile, Ricky, strong and quick, diverts a few of the most valuable boxes, the ones filled with the priceless Cabbage Patch Kids, off the main pallet and into a hidden alcove behind some trash dumpsters before Gus even begins his official count. The official manifest is then checked against the remaining cargo on the pallet. Everything matches perfectly. The paperwork is clean. Later, under the cover of darkness, Kevin and Ricky would move their stolen inventory to a secondary location, selling the dolls for pure, untraceable cash profit to a network of desperate, wealthy parents they'd cultivated. It was a simple, almost elegant crime, and it would have remained perfect if not for a watchful old man who, in his own quiet search for a shortcut to his Florida dream, decided he didn't want to expose them. He just wanted a piece of the action. Gus Petrovich hadn't been a hero trying to stop a crime. He'd been a competitor trying to get in on it. Armed with a solid theory and Gus's cryptic notebook, Lieutenant Rizzo knew it was time to apply pressure. A quiet criminal partnership like the one between Kevin Doyle and Ricky Schultz was a fragile thing, held together by the twin threads of trust and mutual benefit. The moment fear and suspicion were introduced into that delicate equation, it would begin to unravel. He decided to bring them both in for formal questioning, but not together. He wanted them isolated, stewing in separate rooms, their stories unable to touch or reinforce each other. He sent one patrol car to Toy World to collect Kevin during his lunch break, and another to Ricky's house. The message was clear and unmistakable. This was no longer a casual chat in the manager's office. This was official. Kevin Doyle arrived first. He walked into the station with the same confident swagger he displayed at the mall. Though Rizzo, a connoisseur of human anxiety, noted a slight, almost imperceptible tightness around his eyes and the way he kept flexing his hands. He sat in the stark gray interrogation room and immediately went on the offensive, adopting the tone of an unjustly accused man. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, I've told you everything I know. This is becoming harassment. I'm trying to run a multi-million-dollar retail operation during the busiest time of the year." Rizzo let him talk, letting the silence hang in the air after he finished. He placed a single steaming cup of foul-smelling vending machine coffee on the metal table in front of him. Then, slowly, dramatically, he slid Gus's spiral notebook across the table, open to the last damning page. "Recognize this, Kevin? It's Gus's handwriting. He was keeping a little private log, a log of the boxes you and Ricky were skimming off the top of the shipments." Kevin's carefully constructed composure cracked just for a second. His eyes darted to the notebook, a flash of pure panic before the mask was back in place. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, trying to sound dismissive. That could mean anything. Maybe he was counting boxes for a personal project, a charity drive. "You're reaching." He was slick, his denials quick and plausible. He stuck to his story, never deviating, never giving an inch. He was the cool-headed leader, utterly confident he could outsmart a weary old cop. Rizzo knew he wouldn't break Kevin, not yet. Kevin had too much to lose and believed he was far too smart to get caught. He was counting on his young partner's silence and loyalty. An hour later, it was Ricky Schultz's turn. The boy looked like he was walking to his own execution. He sat in the same chair Kevin had occupied, but where Kevin had seemed to dominate the space, Ricky seemed to shrink into it. He stared at his own hands, which were trembling slightly on the table, avoiding Rizzo's gaze. Rizzo used a completely different approach. No aggression, no accusations, just a quiet, paternal disappointment. "Ricky, your parents think the world of you," he began softly. "I spoke to them this morning. They told me you're a good son, helping out with the bills since your dad got laid off. They're very proud of you." Ricky flinched as if struck, a single tear welling in the corner of his eye and tracing a path down his pale cheek. "I am," he whispered, his voice cracking. Rizzo pushed the coffee cup aside and laid out several photographs on the table. They weren't gruesome crime scene pictures. They were the photos from Gus Petrovich's mantelpiece, Gus and Maria on their wedding day, Gus beaming as he held his first grandchild, Gus and his wife on that pier looking happy and carefree. "This is the man who died, Ricky," Rizzo said, his voice low and even. "He had a family just like you. He had a wife. He had a dream. He just wanted to retire and go fishing in Florida. Now his wife is a widow. Wanted to retire. His grandkids won't have their grandpa for Christmas this year or any year after." He didn't mention the notebook, the blackmail, or the stolen dolls. He just laid the raw human cost of the crime on the table between them. Ricky began to tremble uncontrollably, a sob catching in his throat. He was looking at the pictures, at the smiling, living face of the man who was now dead. The partnership, built on the easy, exciting greed of selling toys, wasn't strong enough to bear the crushing weight of a dead man's family photos. Kevin was counting on Ricky's loyalty to their scheme, but Rizzo was betting on his fundamental, youthful conscience. The boy looked up, his face a crumpled mask of misery, guilt, and fear. He was on the verge of breaking. Ricky Schultz didn't confess all at once in a single coherent statement. It came out in ragged, painful waves, a torrent of fear and guilt that he had been holding back for days, a pressure that was finally irrevocably released. He started by admitting to the scheme, confirming every detail Rizzo had pieced together in his mind. It was Kevin's idea from the start, he said. Kevin knew the systems, knew the blind spots, knew how to exploit the built-in chaos of the holiday season. At first, it felt like an exciting game, a thrilling secret between him and the cool, older manager he admired. The money was incredible, more than he'd ever seen. He had already put a $500 down payment on a used Pontiac Trans Am and had given his mom $1,000 in cash, telling her it was a special Christmas bonus from Toy World. It was so easy. It was perfect. And then Gus noticed. He was real quiet about it at first, Ricky recounted, his voice now barely a whisper as he stared at the tabletop. He just watched us. During the morning unload, we'd see him by the loading dock, just watching, making little notes in that book of his. Then, one day, about a month ago, he cornered Kevin by the time clock. He didn't threaten to call the cops or our boss. He was real calm. He said he was impressed with our entrepreneurial initiative. That's the word he used, initiative. He said he was getting old, and his pension wasn't what it used to be. He wanted in. Gus Petrovich, the kindly old guard who always had a Werther's Original in his pocket, had become their silent partner, or rather, their blackmailer. His initial demand was a 20% cut of the take from every stolen box of dolls. For a few weeks, it worked. Kevin was furious, seething about it in private, but he paid. It was better than getting caught and losing everything. But Gus got greedy. The shortcut to his Florida dream wasn't fast enough. That last night, Ricky said, wiping his streaming eyes on the sleeve of his jacket. The night he died. He met us by the service corridor after we'd moved the last shipment of boxes. He said his cut wasn't enough. He wanted it doubled to 40%. He said he deserved it for taking the risk and for keeping his mouth shut. This was the demand underlined twice in his notebook. Kevin, his face turning red with anger, started arguing with him. Voices were raised. It was no longer a tense business negotiation. It had become personal and ugly. Kevin called Gus a pathetic, greedy old man. Gus, his own temper flaring, threatened to expose them both, to go right to the mall's head of security and the police, to ruin everything. I was just trying to get between them, Ricky sobbed, the words tumbling out now. Gus was really yelling, pointing his finger right in Kevin's face. I didn't know what to do. I just put my hand on his chest, just to push him back a step, to tell him to calm down, to cool off. I pushed him. It wasn't a violent, malicious blow. It was a single panicked shove from a scared 19-year-old trying to de-escalate a situation that was spiraling violently out of control. But Gus was 62, his heart already strained and pounding from the adrenaline and fury of the argument. He stumbled backward, his eyes going wide with shock, not pain. He lost his footing, hit the cold, unyielding steel of the stockroom door with a dull, heavy thud, and slid down to the concrete floor. He didn't even make a sound. There was a moment of pure, horrifying silence. Kevin, his anger instantly replaced by cold dread, knelt and checked his pulse. Nothing. Panic, stark and absolute, set in. It was Kevin who, after a few frantic seconds, took control. It was Kevin's idea to take the wallet, to make it look like a simple robbery gone wrong. It was Kevin who coached Ricky, telling him to keep his mouth shut, that it was a tragic accident, that no one would ever know. to keep his mouth. It was a shove born of fear, a death born of tragic circumstance, and a cover-up born of Kevin Doyle's cold-blooded, reptilian self-preservation. The great Cabbage Patch conspiracy wasn't a murder plot. It was a petty crime that had spiraled into an irreversible tragedy in a dark, forgotten hallway. The final piece of the puzzle, the physical proof of the crime that had set everything in motion, was located in a self-storage facility just a few miles from the mall. It was a grim, anonymous place of endless rows of identical corrugated metal doors. Acting on Ricky's tearful confession, Lieutenant Rizzo and his team obtained a warrant. When they slid up the rumbling door of locker number 237, the powerful beam of a police flashlight cut through the musty darkness and landed on them. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of pairs of wide, vacant plastic eyes stared back. Boxes upon boxes of Cabbage Patch Kids were stacked to the ceiling, a silent, colorful hoard of ill-gotten treasure. There they were, Otis Lee's and Cornelia Hayes', Xavier Roberts' signature printed neatly on their vinyl bottoms, their pristine adoption papers tucked safely inside their boxes. They were supposed to be symbols of childhood, of love and innocence, delivered by a mythical stork from a magical land to the waiting arms of adoring children. In this cold cinder-block room, they were nothing more than evidence, mute, tangible symbols of a scheme fueled by greed that had directly led to a man's death. Kevin Doyle, when confronted with Ricky's full, detailed confession and the photos of the storage locker, finally dropped his defiant facade. His arrest was quiet, his earlier confidence replaced by a sullen, bitter silence. He had been so close to his next move, to escaping his life as a toy store manager, only to be brought down by a nervous teenage accomplice and a security guard who wanted a bigger piece of the pie. The two young men, who had dreamed of fast cars and a life beyond their working-class stations, were now facing a slate of charges, including grand larceny, manslaughter, and, because the death occurred during the commission of a felony, a potential charge of felony murder. Their partnership, forged in conspiratorial whispers on a pre-dawn loading dock, was irrevocably broken under the harsh fluorescent lights of a police station. Back in his office late that night, Lieutenant Rizzo looked out the window at the soft, silent falling of the snow, which was beginning to blanket the city in a deceptive layer of purity. The case was closed. The local newspapers would have a field day with it, splashing "The Cabbage Patch Slaying" across their front pages, a sensational, catchy headline for a sad and sordid little story. But Rizzo wouldn't think of it that way. He would remember Maria Petrovich's grief-stricken face, the gallery of happy photos on her mantelpiece, and the simple, earnest dream of a small condo in Sarasota. Gus Petrovich wasn't a hero, and his killers weren't cold-blooded monsters. They were all just ordinary people, caught in the grip of a strange holiday fever, each wanting just a little bit more than they had, a little bit faster than they had earned it. A kindly old man's life was taken, and for what? For a fleeting shortcut to a sunny retirement, and for a secret that, like all secrets born of greed, couldn't be contained. It's a sad and timeless reminder that sometimes the most desperate crimes aren't about hate or grand passions, but about a simple, mundane human avarice that can turn a Christmas dream into a lifelong nightmare, witnessed only by the unblinking plastic eyes of a child's toy.